Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we'll bring you another special, day 554, with Alexey Arestovych, former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, and Yulia Latynina, Russian investigative journalist. Alexey usually tags with Yulia every Thursday, so this time they dive deeper into the drone as new strategy of war fighting, drones that flew and reached Pskov successfully. Are they just another tactical instrument, or is it a sign of deeper changes? Are they the equivalent of special operations, only without much risk? Also, they go deeper into the power of people and the power of prejudice, and analyze Zelensky's statements about political demilitarization of Crimea. Special thanks go today to Lyudmila Skoryantova and Ono Beikos, as well as Vadim Cherdak for being our members. And of course, thank you, Anna Maria and Bill, for your super thanks. You guys are precious. All right, with that, let's dive into this conversation. And apologies for the quality of sound. We are traveling this weekend, so there may be some noises or background interruptions. Enjoy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Yulia Latynina and Alexey Arestovych. Good evening, Alexey. Good evening. I got some echo in my ear, but I hope that is not going to stay with us tonight. Please do not forget to subscribe if you have not done that yet to Yulia Latynina channel, to Alexey Arestovych, and if you are listening or watching that in English, of course, to the Privateer Station. I want to start with drones, Alexey, and I'm being torn between two important things. One is very technical. Basically, you also discussed that those drones that hit Russian airfields with Alpha and Omega channel. But some evil sayers are telling me that the same drones are hitting airfields that are much closer to the front, and they do cause significant damage to that Russian aviation, which is a serious force on the battlefront, including Ka-52's helicopters. It is more difficult to hit them, but they're trying to do it. And the strategic question that I wanted to bring up is that I understand that we all like to talk about game-changing weapons that can actually change a lot of things in this war. But I'm curious about your opinion. If if UAV is indeed a big game changer, not only in the tactical field, but also in the strategic field. Because if we look back at those naval UAVs that damaged a big ship of Russian Federation, it did appear to me as the change of strategy of naval warfare, similar to when the aircraft carriers appeared and they pretty much classed out the dreadnoughts because a small jet, a small plane even, that costs rather cheap versus the dreadnought, can take it out with a successful torpedo attack. And right now I see that big, expensive jets of Russian Federation are being damaged by UAVs. And again, UAVs do not need to carry a lot of explosives. It can actually target it pretty well, so it can hit a certain area that, when exposed to the blast and to shrapnel, causes significant damage to certain elements of the fuselage, certain elements of systems that will take a lot of time to replace and fix, basically taking out this jet out of the fight. So my first question is about tactical application for the near frontline airfields, and the second about strategic. Okay, Yulia, so it does fly both ways, here and there. UAVs hit different targets, and there are different UAVs targeting them. Because fly 5 kilometers, that's one aspect of these things. Flying 50 kilometers is a different story. Flying 700 kilometers, that's a whole other saga. It's like in aviation. One thing is to just get off the airfield and land on it, then fly maybe a circle within 20-kilometer radius from certain markers that you know, and then a different level is to fly to another country across terrain that you haven't seen before, plot it on the map, and follow the route. We are doing all of these. But as for strategic changes, I wouldn't say that. This is a similar way at which Stanislav Lem was pointing in his book Discovery at Sight. The war, as he saw it, will go down the path of miniaturization. And to a degree, it goes down. Yeah, it indeed miniaturizes. But it is way too far to real miniaturization. Yes, there are small drones that you can hold in your hand, right? You can have a small UAV that does it. It can fly for 150 yards and show you your neighbor's street. But UAVs that fly 700 kilometers far, or naval UAVs that go to Novorossiysk and Crimea and others, this is a difficult proposition. And even Budanov commented that 70% of them are getting destroyed on the way, but remaining 30 cause enough damage to justify this application. So I would not call this weapon a game changer on a battlefield, but I would say that this is a good additive and under some conditions a very serious means. But I don't see it as a game changer that would drastically change the rules of engagement. Because, for example, UAV gives you good eyes, right? It doesn't mean that other kinds of intel disappeared. Because UAV is only aerial defense, basically. It's enhanced aerial defense. But battalion or brigade commander has at least 4 others intel services under his command. And when we talked about that meeting, the secret meeting of Zaluzhny with NATO generals, among other things that were discussed was an interesting thought that do not rely on UAVs entirely when you're doing land reconnaissance. And it was highlighted that some other kinds of intel gathering are more reliable, for example, visual intel gathering. And in my opinion, from what I see, because of these UAVs, we have a certain trend among the commanders of intel services on the front of the operation line, that some of them start losing their skills of conducting other kinds of intel. And this is bad. It is easy to launch UAV that will show you the layout in your vicinity, but then if there is no UAV, there is no intel, right? In this case. However, according to the proper military theory, the head of brigade has enough intel service within his team to be able to determine the location of everything the enemy has from machine gun and above. One of the demands that intel has to provide is continuity. Drones cannot, UAVs cannot provide continuity because they have a small window, they go up, they take a look, and they go down. Visual observation is carried out by the actual warfighters, and each of them can stay up there for 3 hours, but you can provide continuous cover of a certain area for 24 hours non-stop. That's why I think that UAVs are a good complementary topic. They add more capabilities to existing tools and existing tool sets, but they should be considered as additive, not as a replacement. As for the attacking UAVs, those are actually a serious game changer on the battlefront. FPV drones especially, FPV UAVs, because it can carry a significant explosive in different modifications, and when you directly hit enemy tank, armored vehicle, APC, or mortar or artillery unit, that actually creates a good additional opportunity in destroying enemy and their resources with these tools. Why? Because missile or anything that's being shot usually is shot and you cannot manage it anymore. It either hits or misses. UAV can go over, return, pick a better angle, and just be more effective. And actually, look at what this war did. It supported all the classic, basic fundamentals of warfighting. And we did address it at Alpha and Omega yesterday, but all the classics of military tactics and strategy, they were vindicated. Because as in everything, there are innovative wing, innovative group, or voices that basically would rely more on special services, on UAVs, those guys who prefer using FPV drones and FPV explosive drones, they actually neglect more classic statements about the war, more classic rules about concentration of artillery, concentration of power, and this classic theory sees drones as additional plus, but not a replacement. And in fact, when we make small UAVs that will fit on your hand, if we develop some new kind of explosive based on new physics that can actually be small but cause a significant damage, then perhaps it will change the picture. But not today, not yet. So this is a serious aid, but this is not an absolute game changer. Not yet, Alexey, but you did quote Stanislav Lem. And I did want to quote another one. I actually have a favorite book, War Before Civilization. When I read this book about how humans actually attacked each other even before they had any significant tools, and some examples were from the islands of New Guinea, I understood the main principle. Just looking at that, what happened there? One village was attacking another village. There were no bigger units than village in that area, and it was always done at night. They always were killing at first the weakest. So women and children were attacked first, and we're talking about Papua New Guinea. And the main goal was to not lose anybody, not to have any casualties on your side. So, on a bigger scheme of things, it's not exactly knightly to behave like that, but it's very logical. And when I see this FPV drone or any other UAV with explosives flying towards the target, that it can actually, some of them can fly 700 kilometers away. It can already think, by the way. I would want our viewers to pay some attention that some of them are tasked with causing serious damage, not just hit some tower in Moscow city downtown, because it's difficult to miss. And if it was flying in Egypt, it might have hit Giza pyramid. But there are other kinds, the ones that hit the spire of the Kremlin tower, or they hit a certain vehicle, a certain airplane on the airfield. That means it has some brains. It has a tool to compare what it sees via the camera with a database of pictures. It doesn't even need to have plenty of explosives, but it needs to be able to hit very significant elements of body. It basically hits an area where the probability of destruction is highest. Because airplane thickness of skin is maybe 2 millimeters, and a proper attack on the airplane would be in some area where the protection is slim and where the damage will cause significant disruption. It doesn't even need to destroy the plane. It can destroy certain things, certain elements in it, so the plane essentially is rendered useless for a long time, for 2 months plus. And, both sides can also claim things that didn't quite happen, that we've hit and destroyed or damaged something, and the other side can say, yeah, some elements are damaged. So, what I'm trying to say is that when these drones, these UAVs are working, they very reminiscent of special services, how they work behind the enemy lines. And I think these drones are somewhat the beginning of what Skynet used to be in Terminator. I would say that the country that is attacking with drones is causing a very uncomparable damage to the other side, because these drones are basically made out of shit and stones and sticks, so it's very poorly seen on the radars, but it has a good potential to cause significant damage to things that are basically expensive units manufactured individually. Yulia, the secret is it's not drone that's doing it, it's the team that's performing this operation. Drone has an element of some intellect, of course, but even very primitive and ancient X-22 missile, when reaching the target, it also looking for the biggest signature around. It was designed to hit aircraft carriers, so even that mammoth was looking at comparing the picture with possible pictures and outlines of the aircraft carrier to pick the target that looks closest to that. Well, yeah, but X-22 costs a ton. Well, true, but drone is a different tool. X-22 is flying at a very high speed and can reach a couple thousand kilometers. And what I'm trying to say is that it's always about people. It's always about the team that is working with this equipment. Equipment allows you to do certain things, but it is the team actually that is reviewing the footage and is trying to understand what is being seen by a drone, or is looking for the pictures, for aerial and proper pictures of jets that need to be attacked. All that information needs to be discovered and analyzed by people prepared for drone, and then they launch drone and guide it to the very last moment when it hits. And satellite, right? Satellite imagery, of course, but satellite also needs support. So as for the civilizational basic principles of war, they're unchangeable, just like laws of physics. The question is more about how professional are those people who are waging wars and how much inspiration they have to use these laws in one way or another. And a lot of people think that sky aces, like German aces in the Second World War, who hit a ton of planes, they shot most of them dueling. While in reality, two-thirds of planes were shot down when they weren't even understanding that they're under attack. And the main condition of success, what was sought by the best of aces in the skies, is to catch a somewhat damaged airplane that is not supported by anyone, that is trying to get back to its airfield and just go over it and destroy it. And for that, one needs a lot of professionalism to find such a novice or damaged vehicle, to approach them right, and to make it so that the enemy wouldn't even suspect that it's being attacked. It's usually much easier to reach your enemy face to face, but then the battle becomes much harder. And tactics is the queen of all in the battlefront. Everything follows tactics. You need to figure out some proper tactical thinking if you want to prevail on the front. And since the very beginning, humans did not want to go face to face. The best preference for them was to find your enemy at night and kill them then. Just like Denis Davidov, the well-known partisan of the Napoleon War in Russia. Why did French call him Black Devil? That poet, Cossack, officer, a very well-rewarded figure in Russia, in Russian Empire. Well, the main thing that he liked to do was to lure them into a village, feed them, offer them libations, and then cut them as they were sleeping in beds at night. So for French, who at that time were eager to even let British shoot at them first when encountered them at high seas, that was a very rude behavior. Very rude behavior which they despised, and they called him Black Devil. Do you know what recruiting under Davidov was like? Yeah, please elaborate. They would take 5 Frenchmen as prisoners. They would give weapon to one of them and would tell him to kill 2 of the remaining 4. They would keep the remaining 2 alive as witnesses, and they would send this one who just killed 2 of his comrades back to his positions, so he would have to report back about all the changes and improvements on the front. And if he misbehaved, if he did not deliver the data, did not deliver what he promised, then the remaining 2 were let go, and they came to their positions and, of course, told everybody about what this person, this other officer, had done, or this soldier. So, while Davidov was a fantastic poet, his poems were very of a Russian-French kind. You know, there is a dry Russian-German kind, but there is also Russian French, and I do adore his poems. So today we know him from different sides, and those who know him the way French knew him, they understand why he was so much hated. Hated so very much by the French, because he was violating the statements of human morale. He was violating the honor, but he was damn effective. Well, Stalin and Mao Zedong, they were also behaving in a very similar fashion. Indeed, Yulia, Mao Zedong, do you know how he recruited his army? So this would not be a quote, but from logic and quotes of his compatriots, what is the main task of the partisan war? So that people would be afraid of partisans more than the occupiers. Only then the partisan war becomes effective. ISIS was doing that in Iraq, and they did come to power like this. So these are very rude, very horrible things. And my one of my great grandmothers and grandmother on my dad's side, she was actually a relative of one of the leaders of the partisan groups in Belarus. And she was telling stories that the scariest thing was not Germans, not German stormtroopers or somebody knocking on the door. The most dangerous ones were Russian partisans, Soviet partisans at the time, and she was ranking them by the level of fear. And we were asking her, "You've been a relative of one of the biggest partisan leader," and she said, "No, it didn't work because if you did misbehaved, if you did say something that they don't like, if you refused to do something what they asked, they would have executed you at the spot." Do you remember Yulia the movie, the checkposts on the roads? Before we go there, Alexey, I also remember my grandma when I was super little, and actually great grandma, and she was still very lucid. She would tell me that when Germans were coming to village, Germans would be asking for eggs and milk. So eggs from hen and milk from cows. And when partisans came, they would be asking for chicken and beef. So they would be killing chicken and beef, not just taking their products. And indeed, Julia, this is true. Very few people even want to know truth about war because it's always easier to pour honey over everything and call everybody a hero. War is too scary and gross, and very few people can withstand the real truth about war. But if we want to understand the nature of war and the time and place of use of new technologies, not many things changed in general since the times when one wild tribe was attacking another. To these days, some wild drones are trying to quietly sneak upon enemy in somewhere Novorossiysk or other place, hit them, and then leave or get destroyed in the process. But one needs to remember that this is additional operations. Special operations can never win the war, define the character of the war, or change the flow of the war. They can help get there, but the main brunt of the effort is always on big groups of troops, aggregations of artillery, tanks, air force, navy. But the groups of special troops, of course, they are fantastic. They can come and destroy the Crimea Bridge. But at the end, it will be actually the infantry and motorized infantry and tankers who will go and grind the enemy and basically will annihilate everybody in their way and take the position by hanging their balls over that. And the quiet special forces, they've been there before, probably fulfilled several objectives, made it easier for their troops to come next day, but they're not the ones winning the war. And I always remember the conversation with Schwarzkopf when he was addressed by proponents of all these new UAVs and new technologies and special forces. Schwarzkopf, when he was commanding over in Iraq, he basically said, "No, I will not risk my military career at the end of it, by using these new technologies and failing, so I'll use the classic process." And he asked for a lot of infantry, a lot of tanks, superior air support, And of course, there were special operations, but the main course was taken out by the main military force. Alexei, do you also know how Mao was making his long marches in China? Very similar technology, actually. His people would come to a village and say, before being sent to village, they were told, "We'll execute you and your families if you don't get us that many people." Then they would come to that village and tell the villagers that you need to give us that many people, otherwise we'll have to execute everybody. And that's how his ranks grew. I'll raise you, Yulia, one more. And in Vietnam, they're actually one of the most effective hand-to-hand and actual in-person fighters in the world back in the days when Soviet Union was still a thing. How they got their universal training? How did they become so effective? They essentially figured that there's only one way to do it. They found the best of the best who knew how to fight, who knew how to be physical with enemy, and they essentially told them, "You guys invent us a whole training system for our troops in 2 months, or we'll have to execute you all." And you know what happened? They indeed created that system. What did they invent, Alexei? Yeah, they invented that universal system to prepare Vietnamese fighters in the shortest time frame. And it was always the case in most places. Do you know how Cheka in Soviet Union rose to its power? Because all these workers and peasants who uprose against the Tsar Empire, they didn't know how to do things. The Tsar police was the most effective troop in this regard, but not all of them left. Some of them stayed, and they basically found where they were and came over and said, "Hey, so you are living in poverty, right? You're not feeding your family well." Correct. Okay, so you basically they'll start working with us, and we'll give you good food rations, even meats and all. Or if you refuse, then we'll have to execute you and give away your apartments to somebody else or your house. And that's how Cheka special committee grew to power. They indeed trained their people. And in Germany, Muller, that famous figure, he started as a police force who was actually tracking and arresting those National Socialists. But at a certain point, he understood that he needs to change colors and joined the Hitler's movement. So, in essence, it's very rational. All these trainings, all these effectivity, its roots in just being effective. Have you watched or read in August of 44th? Yeah, I read it. Almost everything is true there. Do you know where the famous Macedonian akimbo style two-hand shooting came from and the pendulum movement came from? Very simple. Counter-terrorist, counter-spy forces in Soviet Union, they did not have much experience. They had several people who were savvy, the rest were not. So basically, they were forced to tell them, hey, if you find a way to capture Germans who are dropping here with parachutes, and how to capture the spies, because you need to take them alive. If three of the parachutists that you try to catch are killed in process, then you will likely end up in a pit being executed. So these specialists then basically were scratching their head and thinking, okay, so how do we do it? How do we solve it? Why two pistols? Because one often failed. And if you are hand-to-hand fighting and the spy, the parachutist, would probably want to kill you. And if your gun jammed, you'll likely die. So that's why they started with two pistols. So that if one jams, the second still works. And then they can also work and shoot in the legs and shoot the arms. And they also like the 22nd caliber because they're super easy to handle, very easy, very little recoil, and it was not likely to kill an enemy immediately. They're the ones who tried to use kirasas, the armored plates underneath their shirts, one of the first bulletproof vests. They were trying to fulfill the tasks and stay alive. Otherwise, they would be executed by their own. And they indeed ordered a lot of specialists, or at least as many as they could. And then they also work later on elongated clips so they can have more bullets. And that's the practice where it comes from. It's not some crazy technical school, it's real life problems where you have to think because otherwise you will be executed by your own. The effectiveness of violence, right? Yeah, exactly. It's either circumstance or a tyrant, and then people start becoming very inventive. And in just half a year, everybody is a professional, and they're doing pendulum and all. Do you know what pendulum is? It's a very basic motion when you show that you move left and then move right. Some people think it's super crazy maneuver, but in essence, it's a very simple one. It's simple, and that's why it's useful. That's why it works. In some schools, people study too much different principles, different philosophies, different everything. In real life, from all the techniques that you study, maybe 5% are being useful. And they're useful because they're the most primitive, the most direct as a hammer, and that's exactly why they're effective in any situation. You can take an idiot, and in 15 minutes or a couple of weeks of training, he'll start using them. And the first thing when they teach specialists is never get into a dual variant of the fight. Eyes to eyes and all. Never do that. Do you know how the toughest maneuver by Smersh looks like? One is checking your documents, and the other is standing 3 yards away from you with a machine gun, with an automatic rifle. And you could be a ninja, a Shaolin monk, or anyone. If there is another guy 3 yards away from you with an automatic rifle pointed at you, well, there is not much you can do. Doesn't matter who you are. And it's not difficult to train somebody to train a gun on you and squeeze the trigger if you misbehave. You can take anybody, even a wounded one from the hospital, and teach him how to do that. So it may look pretty in the movie, but you're right. Drones are drones, but it's the basic principles and the most simple, effective maneuvers that work in life. And the idea is still the same. Covertly from your enemy, when he's not expecting you, preferably when he is asleep, find the fattest target and then destroy it so the loss of your drone would be justified. And then go hiding and maneuver and find a new target. And that's how it works everywhere. Do you know when the soldier kills? No, Alexei, I want to say that it doesn't always work because we just sang an anthem to the effectivity of violence. And I think that's exactly what Putin tried to repeat in Bucha. He wanted to say how Stalin did, so would I. But it didn't work for him. No, 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 Yulia. You need to understand me right. I am not for violence. I'm against violence. And I can tell you that Bucha is definitely not an example of effective violence management. And terror as well. Violence and terror is a dumb story. It may be somewhat effective temporarily, but it's not alongside it. It's not smart ones. These things were used by Mao and Soviet Union were used only by because of the primitivity of the regimes and lack of experience and expertise. And people who are more intellectual, people who are higher organized, people who are more professional, they can achieve their goals in a much more delicate and surgical way without blanketly destroying the whole town. And there are some, although I have to say, there are some interesting fellows among those who were torturing people. And they found a book by poet Tuchev in one of the basements in Bucha. There was a little stove, remnants of hot chocolate in a cup, and that book by Tuchev, a set of poems. And in the next room, in the same basement, there were 16 people executed. So apparently he was drinking hot chocolate, reading poems, and killing people. But that's more an exceptional character there. The rest were just dumb and brutal. The majority, however, is just primitive and dumb group of people who thought that they would not be punishable for all that they've done, and they also will get rewards, which they did. We've been talking for about half an hour. Alexei, I have a very difficult topic that I want to address, but before going there, I want to ask one more thing about drones, because I expected Ukrainian drones to be flying in much larger numbers and much sooner. And when I started asking questions why they're not flying, I was given answers that one thing is to mass produce these drones, and the other is to navigate all the bureaucratic departments, sub-departments of Ministry of Defense, logistics, etc. in Ukraine. And I heard the famous Ukrainian word corruption. And I'm even saying that with some reservations because only one person told me that, but I still wanted to ask you about it. Statement by Zelensky that corruption needs to be equalized with treason during war times. And I understand there is American Commission and Ministry of Defense for a while already checking and auditing supply services of military. And I was told that money were dedicated to produce artillery shells in Ukraine also a while ago, and the ones that the front could definitely use. And so far, there is no money and there are no shells. Right, Yulia, you see the president started that campaign, right? So at least formally, he understands that these are serious issues, directly threatening the whole system of inner politics in Ukraine. Let's put it this way. Is it true about drones? That they could have been more? I think it's true about everything. And shells. And shells. And everything else. All right, I think we probably will not continue this topic. Let's, at least not today. Let's return to the topic that we touched upon last time. I want to honestly put it out there that I definitely am a fan of elections, but I'm a vehement opponent to universal suffrage when voting right is given to everybody. Because even the Greek Theodore mentioned that back in the cities, back then, when crowds gather and capture control in a city, it ends up with forgiving debts and giving out lands, and everything crashes. The other statement was made by John Stuart Mill that voting rights for everybody unequivocally end in communism. I was once sent a wonderful quote from Engels, who was saying that why do we even need a world revolution? These idiots are expanding the voting rights, so we'll just get to the power eventually. And I want to say that the thesis that universal suffrage ends in either tyranny or socialism, everything after 91 somewhat supports that. In Russia, it's Putin. Venezuela, it's Chavez. In Belarus, it's Lukashenko. In Ukraine, almost ended with Yanukovych. And Yanukovych, by the way, was a result of voting, while Maidan was a protest organized by part of voters. So I am definitely more a fan of a system when those who fight, they do have the voting rights. The only country I think who have voting rights now is Israel, like that. Everybody who fights, they actually vote. Well, not Yulia, not exactly. In Israel, there are a lot of people who do not fight and who said they will never fight because of their religion or the way they see the world, but they still have voting rights. And indeed, yeah, by the way, Alexey, it is true and it is a huge issue for Israel. I don't think that system exists anywhere, Yulia, in the world. And moreover, even in Athens, the main characteristic, even in Athens, was not the factor that you were fighting and serving. This was one of the duties of a citizen, but you were also belonging to one of the philes that was supposedly governed by gods or created by gods. In Sparta as well, yeah, they did have a voting system, and you had your own land, and you could exploit that land, and you were the citizen, and then yeah, you had the rights to use that and the duty to vote and to fight. But except for the fantasies of Heinlein and his science fiction, I don't think we actually had an exact society on this planet that ever gave voting rights only to soldiers. Okay, let's go to Heinlein. I don't think he actually portrays a very attractive society there. It's actually pretty ugly in its own way, right? But okay, let's talk about that. So in Ukraine, there are some people who are fighting, and then there are others who are affecting public opinion and posting a lot of things in the media, and they're talking about decolonization of Russia, etc. So when Zelensky recently mentioned that if Ukraine military will get to the borders of Crimea, then after that they will provide, first of all, demilitarization of that peninsula via diplomatic way to save lives of people. That actually was an interesting reminder about reality. It's difficult for me. I'm picking words here, trying to walk between the raindrops. And I think that if those people who are fighting this war voted, they might have different expectations of this process, if only them were voting. I am against letting voting being exclusive right of only ones who are fighting, of only soldiers, Yulia. I would follow general rules of today's democracy. The main difference between Athens' democracy and today's democracy is that today's representative democracy that's popular in the world. In Athens, they were smaller towns, they knew each other, and they voted for people whom they know. Now we have representative democracy, so very often you vote for a picture on the screen, you just can follow on social media and in statements, but you have to vote for somebody whom you do not know personally. In the best of cases, that system creates a way for you to vote for somebody, but the main drawback that you do not get a feedback because you vote for a picture or internet or some slogan, some road sign poster that you vote for them, but then you don't do anything or cannot do anything against the politics of that person. What can you do then to change his course or her course? Nothing really. There's very poor feedback, and you can only revolt and try to remove that representative or wait for another 4 or 5 years till you get a second chance to put somebody else. So I would say a better system would be when people actually give their rights for others to vote. So, for example, a house gives the rights, a multi-story apartment building gives the rights to vote to one person from that house. And then they go in the same system further, and you can scale it so that person actually represents the people who vote. You can argue that America actually still has remnants of that system. And over there in States, there is a pretty strong system of feedback that's available. Anybody can write his senator, congressman, and usually get answers. And they can go and meet them in the town halls, so the events are happening. When we have our congressmen saying that they're on vacation or going back from Congress, that means they're probably somewhere in Maldives and everybody just doesn't know where they are. And when somebody is asking them about local issues, local problems, they just say that local powers need to take care of that. In 1920s, when they were inventing propaganda and public relations and all that marketing, Burmistrov had a wonderful series of videos on that. If somebody's interested, they can check it out. But he was referring that people first need to be elevated. They need to be shown better morals and better ethics, and that's when democracy will become better. And the other line was that no, you have to deceive people. They will never be able to act smart. They're always rather dumb, so you need to deceive them in politics for their own good to get the right conclusions, to get the right results of it. And one can say that a lot of Western democracies are actually going that way, and they're not even hiding that. So the opinion of the group that was vocal that the masses need to be deceived had prevailed. The proponents of that theory are not even hiding it. They invented the word PR. And people do love to dive into illusions. Our society often creates different illusions, theories, and I see the role of government as to bring them back to reality, rooting them back into reality. People are always prone to diving into illusions, and they develop their own folklore and illusions, and governments need to, and authorities need to root them back into reality, bring them back to reality. Now, reality is a very intricate matter. It is consistent of in half by the actual facts around you and the will of God, and then the other half is of your wills, right? And then the question would be how much influence would have dreamers or psychopaths who want to change history and make it go a different way. And there are different historic figures like Napoleon who left their trace. And I like figures like one in Platoon, Sergeant Barnes, who came to those six who wanted to kill him, and he said, "I'm not going to smoke that shit to avoid reality. I am reality. I am my reality." And the nearest reality each of us has is your own self. The question is, how do you deal with that? And we delegate, in voting, we can delegate some of our reality to other people whom we think will make a good decision. And the person delegating their power essentially is delegating the core innate ability of decision making to somebody else. And people say often, I don't want that. I don't need to deal in politics. I just pick the one whom I like and you guys go fight. You'll fight, I think you'll do it better. And those people who are sneaky, they often use it. They use that propensity of people to do that. There is a movie called Judge with Robert Downey Jr., which I like. He is playing a pretty loose lawyer who goes through the whole rebirthing process into somebody professional and honest, from somewhat honest. So he's saying that if you take a bunch of Americans, different ones, 40 of them will believe in flat Earth, 90 of them will believe in shadow governments, 70 will believe that the AIDS was an artificial creation. The paradox is that if you lock them in the room and give them the case where they are not specialists in, and just lock them in that room for a while, they somehow manage very often to give the right solution, to give the right verdict. So there is something in the democracy that people, however different and incoherent they are separately, together they come to interesting conclusions, and very often they're right. And as an example here, Yanukovych. Yanukovych, people will say, oh, Yanukovych was a complete awful president, right? Right. But do you think Ukraine could have revived without Yanukovych being in power? Oh, yeah. We could, one can say, Alexei, we could have voted in somebody decent. No, Yulia. Trust me, we would have elected somebody who would be slowly corrupted, and then we'll just discover later that Moscow or somebody else corrupted that person and his team. And Moscow, at that time, capturing Ukraine, was using economic and monetary ways to do it. But Yanukovych was such a character that he actually expedited the creation of Maidan by his own actions. And Putin also showed himself in the same way. They created that medal for capturing Crimea on the 20th of February, right? There is even a date there. And on that date, they were still discussing things with Yanukovych and saying that he's legit president of Ukraine. So they started taking Crimea from the legitimate president Yanukovych, even before he fled. And Ukraine needed to provide enough pressure, exert enough pressure on him. So he fled. But, you cannot change that medal. The date has there. The time when he was still in power. And if Putin still would consider Yanukovych as a real president whom he could work with, they probably would be not printing these medals, and the actualization of our problems would have been delayed by years. So one needs to see the bigger picture sometimes. But given that 70% of our voters make a decision impulsively when they enter the voting booth, they just flow with the emotion of whom they want to pick. Then one can pose a question, where does that emotion come from that makes them tick one or the other? I think this is a somewhat sacred process, and I would say, in my opinion, this is some higher powers very often intervening and making a person select one over another. candidate. So one cannot just become a random president just by his own effort. It is a very interesting feature of that world and of that political profession, that on one hand you represent different things, you represent your own interests of people around you, and it's messy and grimy, but on the other hand there is also something sacred in that process. Just like these jurors in the room, if you lock them, they can come up with a good solution. So on one hand, it's pretty dirty and messy. On the other hand, there are elements of sacred in it. My teacher in psychology once asked me, Alexey, do you want to deal with pure spirituality and psychology or actual? And I said, what do you mean? Well, the pure one is when people are sitting somewhere in Himalayas and meditate and cleanse themselves. And the true one is actually here, out here, in the dirt, in the mud, with all the people. When many of them are looking to go for dirty and other sides of life. And you have to deal with all of that. I said, I want true. And he smiled and said, I didn't make you make the choice. And well, here I am, dealing with all this stuff. All right, Alexey, I want to talk about the cases when people collectively change their lives. And since we've been talking about Athens, there are a couple of good examples. One of them is when Athenians demanded Socrates' death because they all ignited from each other on that opinion. And the other was when they executed 30 commanders who actually won a big sea victory for Athens. But demagogues set everybody on fire to such a degree that, and they propagated, I think, the fact that they didn't bury their dead properly or some other things. But people actually voted to execute those commanders. So these cases that I want to address, when people start to tell their own stories, their own fantasies to themselves, and by repeating them over and over again, it is very difficult it makes it almost a reality, very difficult to resist for others. Just like, the servant of a king cannot object to a king. So you look at that and you understand that you cannot go against that flow. And I think Zelensky's words about Crimea, about political solution for Crimea, I think that would have been probably Zelensky's attempt to bring people to actual reality. And from what I hear on the front, the first line is broken and the Ukrainian army will probably get to Takhmak, right? But also I hear that one should not underestimate Russian army. This is one of the most difficult fights that Ukrainian military is doing. It's not Kherson, not even Bakhmut, not what was happening near Kiev, doesn't even compare to what's happening in the south, on the southern front, and Zaporozhye. The best Russian troops are there, fighting with the best of Ukrainian army. And one should not be very lightheaded about Ukrainian wins there. It's a difficult and bloody process. All right, Yulia. So bringing people to reality can come different ways, right? Reality is what we ultimately want to make a reality. We can say that in our current capacity, we cannot take Crimea militarily, right? With that mood, you can sell that elephant, right? Right. Or you can also say that we cannot get to the borders of 91. The other question would be, what has been done? Why are we not capable, right? And you can go this way. Or you can look at other angles and say what is achievable right now. And it's a good story about two lighting specialists on the film set. And they're setting up their lights and talking to each other. And one said, hey, I heard you just married. He's like, yeah, I did. Is she beautiful? Depends upon how you put the light on her. So reality depends upon how you shed the light on it. You can highlight different things in reality, and it'll make a rather different picture. My position is known. I think we can get to the borders of 91 only under two conditions. One, West gives us more resources, not by dripper like right now, but definitely a flood of it, a steady stream, then we can do it. And also, we need to change logistics internally to be able to process all that. In our current condition, I think we can get to Crimea mouth of the peninsula, and that would also be a radical change in this war. But right, this is, I think, what is actual. It depends also what our society agrees to. Are we eager to recruit another 300,000 and sacrifice 50 to get to the borders of 91? These are the questions that need to be asked if you really want to bring people to reality. These questions are asked rarely, Alexey. Well, yeah, mostly they're not even asked. Most people just follow the course set in the 1920s. Lie, lie, lie. Okay, let's say not lie, but PR people to the right point of view, to the right decision. And then it becomes a tradition, a very well entrenched tradition. We, in Ukraine, have even a pattern embedded in our anthem and in the logic of our Cossack past. There is a word, hero. Heroes do not die. But any professional military knows that you need heroes only where you failed to plan, where you failed to execute according to the plan. A heroism of one person is a crime of another, right? Right. A military needs to go to his job as to war as to his job, and it's not doesn't have to be heroic. It needs to be a job, and he needs to be able to conduct his work professionally, without extra acts of heroics. And as one of the commanders said, that heroes, I understand that heroes don't come back from wars, and I don't want my soldiers to be heroes if they are not coming back from war. And then there are more questions you need to raise about quality of supplies, quality of training, support, overall strategy. You can highlight these elements of reality. Reality is a black cat hidden in a dark room. As always, the question depends upon somebody who has a flashlight. You can put the light in her eyes, or you can shine the light up her butt, and you can see very different reality. That actually creates a different problem. What I observed in the war in Chechnya, who started this war, who fought in the middle, and who survived. All the heroes have died, and whatever is left, that's God forgive me, but yeah, bless their hearts. Yep, it depends which parts do you choose to light up. I think we asked some questions to which there are no answers yet, but they are already in the sphere, in the mind sphere. You need to start asking them. They already are popping up. Thank you. Huge thank you, Alexey. This was Yulia Latynina. This was Alexey Arestovych. I think we'll talk about drones more later. I probably will talk about that in my personal streams. I like to connect different AI and recognition systems, so that topic is tasty for me. As a philologist, I do appreciate artificial intelligence and the use of new tech in the equipment. Oh, sure, Yulia, go ahead. You can find a lot of people who can actually talk to you about that in order to cross the border and deceive Russian electronic system, you need to add a certain feature to the thing, and it'll fly further and it'll achieve things better. But it's not my forte. I will not go. Alexey, it's okay. I actually am for the simplicity. You don't need to destroy Russian electronic warfare measures. You just need to create something that's cheap and that works, right? Okay, I think we can agree on that. On this, thank you. And it was Yulia Latynina, Alexey Arestovych. Do not forget to subscribe, click the like button. And if you are listening or watching that in English, do not forget to subscribe to the Privateer station. We do appreciate that as well. And please come again. Till later.